In November 2015, locally based media outlets started reporting that a member of what was once Russia's imperial family had died in the Northern Territory of Australia. He wasn't quite the heir to the throne like they said he was, but he was a direct descendant of Tsar Alexander III. The news reported that the man was Leonid Kulikovsky, grandson of Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna. How did Leonid Kulikovsky, first cousin once removed of Nicholas II's children, end up buried 15 minutes from my house in Darwin? In 1866, then Tsarevich Alexander Alexandrovich married Princess Dagmar of Denmark, later known as Empress Maria. Of their 6 children, Olga was the youngest. In 1901, at the age of 19, she married Duke Peter Alexandrovich of Oldenburg. Their marriage was not a happy one, as Peter was believed to be homosexual. Olga was stuck in her relationship until 1916, when she was finally allowed to marry Nikolai Kulikovsky, a cavalry officer. Olga, Nikolai, and their 2 sons, Guri and Tikhon, fled from revolutionary Russia to Denmark in 1920. In 1940, the youngest son, Guri, married a woman named Ruth Schwartz. They had 2 children, Xenia and Leonid. In 1948, the Kulikovskys relocated again to Canada. Nikolai and Olga lived out the rest of their lives there until 1958 and 1960. How did Leonid Kulikovsky end up buried 15 minutes from my house in Darwin? Who was he, and what was his life like? Katherine has a population of 10,000 people and is the 4th largest settlement in the Northern Territory. It's just over 300 kilometres from Darwin, and it took us about 4 hours to get there. I was lucky enough to have Josh come with me on the trip. He helped me record sound and also shared some of the driving.
When the coffee club opened up, it was a really big deal.
Oh, really?
Yep.
We drove to North Bank Caravan Park to meet the owner, Peter Byers. Leonid lived in North Bank for about 5 years. It's also quite fitting that the area of Katherine is called Cossack, the name for the Russian cavalry. Leonid was known to his family as Nidik and went by Nick while in Australia. No one here knew anything about Nick's heritage. Peter showed us around North Bank Park on his quad bike. He told us about the masses of peacocks that come down to North Bank. They were mostly around people's private homes, so I didn't film them, but they definitely made their presence known.
The lady up the road had peacocks, and my wife brought about 4 or 5 peacocks home, and they started jumping up on the roof, and I started unpacking the shotgun. And of course we had the Katherine flood, and our peacocks all moved up the road to the lady up the road. And after the flood, she said, "Oh, boy, your peacocks are up here." She said, I'll bring them down home, bring them down here. I said, "Bring them down here, I'm going to shoot them." "Oh, don't do that." I said, "Well, that's what's going to happen." So for what, probably 6 or 8 years we had no peacocks. And then all of a sudden, got up one morning and we got bloody 20 or 30 of the bastards. Mating time, that's when they start jumping up on cars, and that's when the shotgun comes out. Now, they're not bad eating either.
Leonid worked for the Sydney Water Board for several years in the 1970s. After that, he bought a Winnebago and started travelling around Australia. He was at the King River when one day he went to walk Rakky and his camper van was stolen and trashed. The police brought the van to North Bank Park, and that's where he stayed ever since.
Nick never had a clue what he was going to do. He didn't want to stay in caravan parks. And as far as I know, from Sydney, when he's left Sydney, it's been out bush all the time. The police found the Winnebago, and they brought it here. And then they bought him a tarp to put over it, and just it was starting of the wet season was starting, and I went over there one day and he'd done nothing with the tarp. I just thought, what's wrong with that lazy old bastard? The police bought the tarp for him. They brought the vehicle home here, but they paid for everything for him. You'd think he'd get in and cover it up, but he just lost interest in it. He had no interest whatsoever in fixing it up. Suddenly, out of the blue, it disappeared, and he ended up with an old motor car. He must have done the deal with me missus about renting the unit there. But he just seemed to fall in love with Katherine and had everything he wanted, and he was happy.
Peter showed us Nick's old cabin towards the back of the park. A new tenant lives there now, but Peter said Nick used to park his car right outside.
I rented the whole building. He never even had a lease on it. It was just day-to-day type of thing.
Peter described Nick as liking to keep to himself. He loved reading and walking his dog. Nick was not the first or last person to pass away at Northbank Park. Peter still had some of Nick's things stored in his shed, as they are generally left to deal with people's affairs after they die. There was a huge stack of photographs Nick had taken. Peter showed them to us and even let us keep them.
More dog. Water hole somewhere. Where the hell is that? Oh, that was down the back. More dog. Oh, there he is with the goat. The dog.
You thought a goat?
No, it was my goat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. These are just photos of where he must have been parked out bush.
Yeah.
I don't know, I was just going to see if there's any photographs of him.
Conspicuously, there are no photos of Nick. They were mostly of Rakky and of his camping trips. Although it seems he was quite a good photographer. A lot of his photos are well framed, and they show an interesting sense of space. I wonder if he'd had any training, or had just had that much practice that he'd gotten good at it.
He just seemed to like Katherine. It was free. You could walk around in stubbies and a t-shirt. The temperature seemed to suit him fairly well, and he didn't have any friends, but he always had someone to sit down and have a beer with. Nick drank beer and I drank rum, so we didn't do much drinking together. The television was his main interest.
And the reading as well.
Reading, yes, yeah. He used to sit out the front of the annex of the unit there, for 3/4 of a day reading books. And you'd walk past, you'd see the book. I'll show you some of the books. I said they were too heavy for me to read. I'll show you some of the books. There was a stack of them, but I think someone must have taken most of them. The whole heap of tapes there he used to have.
Capes?
Yeah, music.
Oh, tapes. Okay.
If you want them up at the university, you're quite welcome to them. Books there. That's about it. That's about all that's left.
So those are some of the books that we would read, was it?
Yeah. Oh, Fred.
Everything I've read about Leonid said that he read a lot of history and war, heavy subjects, as Peter put it. Peter said that most of his books had been taken already, donated to the local library and primary schools and sold at garage sales. But all that was left seemed to be airplane reading. Mystery paperbacks and 3 Jeremy Clarkson books.
Not yet, though. They want to have a look at all the books, the Nick's books, and photographs, and I'll do another 5 minutes.
There you go.
Is that all of them?
Yep.
Yeah. Nick clearly loved his dog. He would take Rakky out along a path every morning.
Yeah, in the morning you'd go up through the park. Over on the riverbank there's a bitumen bike track. He used to go out in the morning when I was always working, so he'd always pull up and have a yak to me, because his dog had come up to me and I'd pet his dog, and we'd have a bit of a yak for, not for long, and he'd walk down to the second or third little bridge there, and then he'd turn the dog loose there, and then he'd walk home.
Peter said that Rakky hadn't been around other dogs when he was young. This meant he was a bit antisocial and had to be kept away, but this didn't seem to bother Nick. He'd let him loose to run around every morning, and then return home until it was time for the afternoon walk.
He never said anything about his relationship with Russia. I just naturally thought he'd come from Finland, and I did ask him when I said, why'd you migrate? Did you have a family bust up or something? And he just seemed to waver over it, and I never pushed the subject. But apparently him and his sister don't, well, from what we find out now, didn't get on real well together. Never ever said anything much about Sydney. He used to talk about the work they did down there when they had tree roots growing into the pipes and breaking pipes and all that type of stuff, but nothing about where he lived or how he lived or whether he was married, single. And of course, I don't quiz people. If they want to say something, I listen to them. But besides that, it was just a nice old fella.
The afternoon walk went around the back boundary fence. Nick would take Rakky out every night and do the same walk. Peter said walking Rakky was the highlight of his day.
Last, about 6 weeks, Nick wasn't well. He was sick. He wouldn't go to a doctor. He reckoned it was only the flu he had. It doesn't sound like he had the flu. Eddie, it was a couple of us there, driving him up to the hospital. No, I'm right, I'll get over it. And I said to him, I even said to him one day, Nick, be careful, at your age, pneumonia is a big thing. Please go and get a pneumonia, to get the injections so you don't get pneumonia. Oh, no, I'll be right. Poor bugger.
It was on the afternoon walk one day in September, when, as Peter describes it, he set out but only made it to the tree. It was 2 years before his cause of death was corrected from being a heart attack to kidney failure. He sat down beneath the tree with Rakky and passed away.
That's the big tree behind you there that Nick passed away underneath. It shed one big limb, one big side of it died after Nick died, so it must have went out in sympathy with him.
In solidarity.
Yeah. The white got white ants in it, so it had a reason to die, but it just seemed funny. Nick died there, and then all the leaves fell off the tree, and by the time I got down there and found out it was white ants, it's actually still laying there. We're going to cut it up for firewood for the tourists. The police were here. There was a whole heap of police here for half the day, and we did a statement. that was it. Oh, then had all these people ringing up about the dog, and then they started ringing up about Nick. But because of the situation with the dog not being dog friendly, we found a home for it with a lady who knew the situation with the dog, and she took the dog. And I have talked to her. I have talked to her for quite a while now, but she was quite happy with the dog. He said, yeah, it was a good, friendly dog to her, so she was happy. Some Russian, I forget what he was. He did all the organising of the funeral. I think he organised the body to go from here to Darwin. But yeah, they never even had the decency to let us know when the funeral was. Tended to be a very select group that were going to go to the funeral. You know, these people that were Russian or connected with that society. So, you know, they didn't want a bloody rough old caravan park owner there.
I remember the day of the funeral. I was following the news and I knew that the funeral was on that particular day, but I didn't know where or when, or if the public was even allowed to go. And looking at the photos of the funeral now, I think I was right. There was only a handful of people there. Some Russian dignitaries and politicians.
Yeah, when the Russian embassy weren't interested in it, I thought that was a pretty piss deal. So we contacted them, but they never even bothered ringing back, because when you ring them up, you probably get a floor sweeper or a toilet cleaner or someone like that, and you leave all the information and your phone number, and you think, well, at least someone with a brain would ring up. And since then I've found out that the Russians are not the slightest interested in their history, where it goes back to kings and queens and revolutions, and you know, they're trying to forget them, not join them.
Leonid is buried in the Paspaley family plot in a cemetery in Darwin. The cemetery is off a main road, and I can't believe I'd never been there before. I was surprised at how easy it was to find his grave. I thought I would be there looking for it for at least 20 minutes, but as soon as I walked in, there it was. The Greek Orthodox section is a very elaborate part of the cemetery. Even while I was there, family members were performing religious ceremonies around the graves of their loved ones. But Nick's was forlorn. It was quite odd to see. It's a modest headstone, and underneath his name, it suddenly says that he was descendant from Tsar Alexander III. We wondered if he might object to this even, because he seemed to escape his title in life, and that was the way he preferred it. Although the tradition with Russian Orthodox funerals is that the service is the same for, quote, a king or a beggar. So maybe Nick would have been okay with this after all.
Well, you know, if it was a bloody an old Prime Minister of Australia, and he died over in bloody France or somewhere, we would have brought him home. But you know, it's your history. It's in the past. It's not going to affect the future. So why do you have to try and hide it?
In his lifetime, Nick lived in a lot of different places and countries. And out of all of these, Katherine seemed to be the most like home for him. And Darwin isn't Katherine, but it is a lot closer than Russia.